Mikami, a 37-year-old lonely office worker, this loser is living an ordinary life in Tokyo. He's okay with his routine, but there's one thing he's never managed to do: get a girlfriend, and I think guys this also a biggest problem for you. Mikami was completely blindsided when he found out his girlfriend had cheated on him with his dickhead best friend, Tamura. Even worse, he was invited to their engagement dinner. But during the event, things took a dark turn when a crazed man with a knife suddenly sprinted towards the couple. In a split-second decision, Mikami pushed Tamura out of harm's way, but the knife sank deep into his own stomach. As he felt his life slipping away, Mikami noticed how unbearably hot his body felt. At that moment, a divine voice spoke in his head, granting him the heat resistance ability. While Mikami lay there, wondering why he was about to suffer such a painful death, God gave him even more powers, like invincibility to physical attacks and the ability to block out pain. His body was being remade, one that no longer needed blood to survive. In his final moments, Mikami reflected on how miserable his life had been, especially how his best friend stole the girl he loved. He thought the world was cold and heartless. Hearing this, God granted him cold resistance and fused it with his heat resistance, creating the ultimate thermal invincibility skill. He regretted dying as a useless and made a vow, in his next life, he'd hook up with as many as possible and never use any protection. In response, the system granted him the legendary Predator skill. As his soul began to leave his body, he realized that even a magician couldn't stay a virgin for 30 years, so God blessed him with the Great Sage skill. After taking his last breath, Mikami's soul was transported to a new world, where he was promised to gain incredible powers and build his own empire with the most beautiful monster girls. But things didn't exactly go as planned. When he finally woke up, Mikami realized he had been reincarnated as a completely useless, blind slime. Determined to figure out what he could do, he started testing his new powers by dissolving healing herbs in the caves around him. For hundreds of years, Mikami consumed everything he could find in the cave, even though he didn't need to eat or sleep. He started to wonder where all the food was disappearing to, since it wasn't piling up anywhere. That's when God's voice spoke to him again, explaining that it was part of his Predator skill, an overpowered ability that let him store and analyze anything he ate, no limits. This broken ability allowed him to absorb anything, setting the stage for his eventual rise to power. After analyzing the hypocute herbs he'd been eating, Mikami's Great Sage skill revealed that he could turn them into healing potions. Excited by this discovery, he consumed all the remaining herbs in the cave and transformed them into potions. Once the herbs were gone, he found a rare crystal and immediately devoured it. As he continued scarfing down everything he came across, he accidentally slipped off a cliff and plunged into water. Since he didn't know how to swim, panic set in. He couldn't die a second time as a Desperate, he began swallowing all the water to push himself out of danger, vowing to focus on his plot in this life. However, he overdid it and shot himself into a barrier, which knocked him back and destroyed his body. Luckily, his slime form allowed him to regenerate quickly. Suddenly, he heard an ominous voice calling him small. Traumatized from his past life, Mikami feared the dragon was insulting his, well, size. But the voice, belonging to a dragon, shouted at him to stop daydreaming and listen. Mikami, who still couldn't see anything, apologized. The dragon promised to grant him vision on 2 conditions: keep him company and don't freak out when he saw him. Mikami agreed, gaining the magic sense skill, one of the 10 forbidden abilities in the world. He immediately noticed all the ores scattered around the cave, but became depressed when he saw that he really was just a useless little slime. Then, when he finally saw the dragon, Mikami couldn't help but scream in horror at how terrifyingly ugly the creature was. The dragon, clearly unbothered, introduced himself as Veldora, the storm dragon, one of the 4 true dragons in existence. He explained how, 300 years ago, he accidentally burned an entire town to ashes and was sealed away by a powerful hero using the unlimited prison skill. Hearing Veldora's story, Mikami felt a connection, remembering how lonely it was being a 37-year-old So, he asked Veldora if they could be friends. However, Veldora, being the typical stubborn type, responded like a total tsundere, saying, "It's not like I'd ever want to be friends with you or anything. I think guy you understand what he mean." After agreeing to become friends, Veldora revealed that he only had 100 years left before all his magic would be completely drained. He also explained that the cave was packed with rare minerals because it had been absorbing his magical energy for centuries. Hearing this, Mikami didn't want to lose his only friend, so he tried to use his Predator skill on the barrier that was trapping Veldora, hoping to break through. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and Mikami was left feeling like a failure. The only way to break the prison that held Veldora was to analyze the barrier from both the inside and the outside. However, since Veldora's powers were sealed, it would take him a long time to do it on his own. Not wanting to lose his new friend, Mikami came up with a bold plan. He would store Veldora inside his body using his Predator skill and carry him around while they worked together to break the barrier. Veldora, amused by the idea, laughed and agreed, excited to be part of Mikami's upcoming adventures. Before they set off, Veldora decided they should become family by giving Mikami a name. He asked Mikami to name him first. Thinking of something cool, Mikami chose to call the storm Dragon Tempest. Although Veldora initially shouted in mock disgust at the name, he quickly warmed up to it, deciding it was the best name he'd ever received. In return, he named Mikami Rimuru Tempest. A bright light shone as the name was engraved into Rimuru's soul, solidifying their bond as family. With their new partnership established, Rimuru used his predator skill to swallow the barrier and began analyzing the unlimited prison with the help of his great sage ability. However, the moment Veldora disappeared from the cave, the entire world felt his absence, and the kingdoms prepared for war. Over the next few weeks, Rimuru continued devouring rare minerals and unlocking powerful new abilities. He also began training by fighting the monsters in the cave, gaining the power to mimic their appearances and abilities. One day, he encountered an S-class centipede but easily defeated it with a single hit, as well as a giant black spider, giving him the ability to swing around the cave like Tarzan. Eventually, Rimuru found the exit to the cave, and as the doors opened, 3 adventurers stepped inside to investigate Veldora's disappearance. Rimuru knew this was his chance to finally leave the cave. As soon as he touched the grass outside, a swarm of weak and ugly goblins surrounded him. All of the goblins' weapons were as shabby as their scrawny bodies, but they immediately recognized Rimuru as someone powerful and asked what he was doing there. This was his first chance to speak, but as he tried to project his voice, the sheer force of it knocked them all to their knees, begging him to quiet down. Confused, Rimuru asked why they were there, and their leader led him to their goblin village. An old goblin, who looked like he should have died last week, introduced himself as the elder of the village. He explained that monsters had been attacking the forest ever since their god disappeared a month ago. As Rimuru glanced at the village's paintings, he realized that their god was none other than Veldora. The elder went on to ask Rimuru to protect their village, but Rimuru, modestly claiming to be just a weak slime, was quickly corrected by the elder, who said his aura was so strong it stank worse than an anime convention. Wondering what they were talking about, Rimuru activated his great sage ability to see from their perspective. To his surprise, he saw a massive demonic aura radiating from him, spreading across the entire forest. Embarrassed, he quickly absorbed all of his aura, pretending that it had all been part of a grand plan to test them. The elder thanked him for showing mercy and explained their dire situation. A few weeks ago, half the village was wiped out by a pack of dire wolves, terrifying creatures capable of killing 100 goblins before a single one is taken down. With their entire pack still intact, the village now only had 60 warriors left. Desperate, the elder got on his knees, begging Rimuru to help, promising that the village would pledge their loyalty to him. Remembering how he had been treated in his past life, Rimuru decided to help, just as the wolves' howls echoed in the distance. He promised to aid them, and the goblins swore their loyalty, making Rimuru the leader of their village. As they prepared for battle, Rimuru quickly realized that the goblins were useless, like he's in his previous life. So, before doing anything else, he decided to heal the injured soldiers first, knowing they'd be useless otherwise. After being taken to their infirmary, Rimuru came up with a unique way to heal the wounded soldiers. He decided to swallow one of the injured goblins and, after a moment, spat him back out, fully healed. Turns out, when Rimuru swallowed them, he injected their insides with his warm, sticky healing liquid. One by one, he continued to heal all the fallen soldiers using the same method, and before long, every goblin was back on their feet. As the last one was healed, nighttime began to fall, signaling that a big battle was approaching. The leader of the direwolves had gathered his entire pack and began charging toward the goblin village. The goblins had managed to put up some fences for defense, but the leader's son warned him to be cautious of the slime, Rimuru. Rimuru, confident in his abilities, told the wolves to leave before they all got annihilated. The wolf leader, however, roared at his pack, commanding them to tear down the fences and devour everyone inside. As the wolves attacked, the goblins fired arrows, and to the wolves' surprise, some were killed instantly. The leader soon realized that sharp threads were slicing through his wolves, enraging him. He bit through the threads and charged directly at Rimuru. In response, Rimuru restrained the wolf leader with more threads and unleashed his water blade, instantly killing the leader. With their leader dead, Rimuru gave the remaining wolves an ultimatum: submit or be killed. When they hesitated, Rimuru used his predator skill to swallow the leader's body, then mimicked his form and powers. Taking on the appearance of the fallen leader, Rimuru roared at the wolves to submit once more. At first, they resisted, but Rimuru began to worry he might have to kill them all. Luckily, they soon kneeled before him, swearing their loyalty. After transforming back, the village finally enjoyed peace. But the next morning, Rimuru faced a new problem. He didn't know how to care for both the wolves and the goblins. Thinking on his feet, he decided to pair the goblins and wolves together in teams to gather food and build shelter. Just as he was about to organize them, Rimuru realized he didn't know any of their names. Rimuru asked the old goblin elder what their names were, but the elder explained that none of them had names. So, Rimuru took it upon himself to name all of them. When he announced this, everyone began cheering and eagerly lined up. The first one-up was the elder himself, whom Rimuru named Rigard after the elder's late son. He then began naming the others, starting with the elder's son. After naming Rigard's brother, Rimuru turned to the next goblin, a particularly ugly one, and named him Gopta. Another goblin, who was a bit on the heavy side, got the name Fatso. As he continued naming the goblins, the elder started to worry if it was really okay for Rimuru to give so many names at once. Rimuru reassured him that it was fine. Soon, the only ones left without names were the wolves. The first wolf up for a name was the son of the leader Rimuru had defeated. Despite everything, the young wolf was eager to receive a name. Rimuru decided to honor his family's legacy and named him Renga after Storm Fang. But as soon as he said that name, Rimuru began to dissolve, his internal magic completely drained. For the next 3 days, the goblins and wolves did their best to take care of him while he recovered. When Rimuru finally woke up, the first thing he noticed was a hot goblin chick. Confused, he wondered if he had seen her before. Just then, Rigard entered, explaining that he had evolved and this was the result of monsters gaining names. All the goblins had undergone evolutions, becoming stronger and more humanoid in appearance. Suddenly, Ranga burst through the wall, overjoyed to introduce himself, and his tail whipped around so wildly it created a mini tornado. The whole village celebrated Rimuru's return. When Rimuru asked why all the wolves had evolved as well, Ranga explained that when even one member of their pack is named, the entire group evolves. As a result, they were no longer direwolves but had become tempest wolves. Ranga's tail excitement sent Rimuru flying again. But as he picked himself up, he realized running the village wouldn't be easy. Gathering everyone together, Rimuru set 3 important rules: no attacking humans, no fighting among themselves, and no belittling other races. To keep order, he appointed Rigard as the Lord of the Goblins. Overcome with excitement, Rigard nearly fainted but promised to serve until the day he died. With the new rules in place, the goblins and wolves split into groups to protect the village and gather food. However, there was one problem: none of them knew how to build a house. On top of everything, the goblins didn't even have proper clothes. Rigard informed Rimuru that the only ones who knew how to make clothes were the dwarves in a nearby city. Seeing this as his opportunity to finally escape the filthy, rundown village, Rimuru decided he would go and persuade the dwarves to help rebuild the village, leaving Rigard in charge while he was away. That evening, they set off on the backs of the Tempest Wolves, with Rimuru feeling relieved to finally leave the goblins and their dirty green faces behind. They raced through the forest and up the hills until they stopped to rest for the night. Curious about how Rigard's slain brother got his name, Rimuru asked him. Rigard explained that his brother had been named by a traveling demon who had once spent the night in their village years ago. Intrigued, Rimuru asked who this demon was, and Rigard revealed that he was a soldier in the demon lord's army. Hearing this, Rimuru became concerned, hoping he would never cross paths with the demon lord or his army, fearing it might lead to a dangerous confrontation. Later, as he noticed Ranga by a nearby lake, Rimuru asked if the wolf harbored any hatred for him after slaying his father. But Ranga reassured him, saying he felt only gratitude for receiving a new name and vowed to stay loyal to Rimuru forever. The next day, they continued their journey through the fields, stopping by a campfire at night for dinner. As they sat by the fire, Rimuru started wondering what the dwarf town might look like. Gobta, excited, told him that it was like their own Garden of Eden and mentioned that the town was full of beautiful young hot elves, adding that their melons sized bigger than football. Hearing this, Rimuru Rocket tell him wakes up reality and he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement, seeing this as his big chance to finally focus on some clapping, praying to God. But even the god told you will die of By the next day, they finally arrived at the dwarf town. Wanting to hide his true intentions, Rimuru suggested that he and Gobta enter the town alone, promising to return by evening. With that plan in mind, they set off together, eager to explore what the town had to offer. After arriving at a long queue outside the dwarf town, 2 bandits approached Rimuru and Gobta, threatening to take out Gobta, whom they called scrawny and ugly, and sell Rimuru for quick cash. The bandits were clearly looking for trouble and didn't want to leave without a fight. Rimuru, sensing the situation, told Gobta to hide his face. Then, Rimuru transformed into his new form, now an upgraded Tempest Starwolf. Despite seeing this transformation, the bandits refused to back down and were soon joined by more allies. As they all launched their attack at once, Rimuru stood unfazed, ready to showcase his abilities. With a mighty roar, he activated his menace skill, sending a powerful gust of wind that shattered their shields and blew them all away. When the dust settled, the bandits had vanished, and all the other travelers in the area had passed out from the shock. Just then, the city's knights rushed out, assuming Rimuru and Gobta were responsible for the chaos. Without much of a discussion, they threw both Rimuru and Gobta into a cell for causing the commotion. Rimuru tried to explain to the captain, Kaido, that he was actually trying to maintain peace, but before the situation could be cleared up, another soldier arrived, reporting that several soldiers had been badly wounded in the mines by a monster. Kaido suggested using healing potions to treat the wounded, but the soldier informed him that they had run out of supplies. Sensing an opportunity, Rimuru offered a barrel full of healing potions he had already prepared. The knights were confused, wondering how Rimuru had hidden such a large supply of potions, but with no better options, Kaido decided to take the potions and use them to help his injured men. That night, Kaido returned with the wounded soldiers, who all thanked Rimuru for healing their injuries. After they left, Kaido, grateful for Rimuru's help, freed him from the cell and invited him to dinner. Curious about what Rimuru wanted in exchange for his aid, Kaido was surprised when Rimuru simply asked to meet the best blacksmith in the city. The next day, Kaido gave Rimuru a tour around the city, and Rimuru couldn't help but think how much better this place was compared to the filthy goblin village. He would have happily stayed, but he had made a promise to return with a blacksmith. Soon enough, they arrived at the blacksmith's shop, where Kaido introduced the blacksmith as Kaijin. At that moment, 3 soldiers entered, shocked to see Rimuru, the same slime who had saved them with his healing potions. The soldiers were Kaijin's workers, and after hearing how Rimuru had helped, Kaijin was grateful and asked how he could repay him. Rimuru explained that he needed help building houses and making weapons for the goblins. Kaijin was willing to help, but he had a problem. He was on a tight deadline to deliver 20 longswords to the king by the end of the week and had only finished 1 sword so far. Plus, he had run out of materials. Rimuru then remembered he had consumed magic ore back in the cave and decided to spit it out. Kaijin was amazed to see that the magic ore had already been processed into a high-quality measle cluster, which could create even stronger swords. Rimuru made a deal with Kaijin, offering the magic ore in exchange for teaching the goblins how to build houses and make weapons. Kaijin agreed, and with only a few days left, ordered his workers to get to work. Wanting to help, Rimuru asked to see the sword Kaijin had already made. Kaijin explained that the sword was crafted from a measle cluster and would grow stronger along with its wielder. Rimuru absorbed the sword and used his great sage skill to analyze it. Then, he used the remaining measle cluster inside him to make exact copies of the sword. One by one, he spat out the completed swords until the entire order was finished. That night, Kaijin and his workers were extremely grateful to Rimuru, and Garm, one of the workers, invited him to celebrate their success at a local bar. Excited to check something off his bucket list, Rimuru followed them to the bar. When they arrived, Rimuru was in for a treat as the beautiful young elves he had heard so much about began fondling his slime form. In that moment, Rimuru thought he had entered his own personal heavenly paradise. Comment guys, do you want to enter in this paradise or not? As Rimuru was enjoying the night at the bar, an elf offered to tell his fortune, and another elf suggested revealing his soulmate. Rimuru, feeling like he was destined to be with another slime, wasn't expecting much. However, the orb revealed a beautiful young girl, and Rimuru thought she looked Japanese, sparking his curiosity. Just then, an arrogant, unattractive man approached them, and Kaijin immediately recognized him as Vesta, a member of the king's army who had given him the impossible task of making 20 swords. Rimuru thought Dickhead had a most ugly face in the universe. Vesta, full of himself, taunted Kaijin, saying he would lose his position for failing to deliver the swords. He then insulted Rimuru, calling him a lowly monster and saying he was too ugly to be seated at their table. When Vesta tried to get the chief elf to kick Rimuru out, she dismissed him, telling him that Rimuru was harmless and basically suggested Vesta should go deal with his frustrations elsewhere. But Vesta, not knowing when to quit, decided to spill his drink on Rimuru. Although Rimuru was tempted to knock his tooth out, he realized this might cause trouble for Kaijin since Vesta was a minister. However, Kaijin didn't hesitate. He punched Vesta hard in the face, sending shockwaves through the bar. As Vesta stood there, dazed and in shock, Kaijin delivered another punch, knocking even more sense into him. Realizing that trouble would surely follow after the incident, Kaijin offered to work for Rimuru, and Rimuru, pleased, thought this was the best news he'd heard since being reincarnated. That night, after the incident at the bar, Rimuru, Kaijin, and the others were arrested for assaulting Vesta, who had to be carried off on a stretcher. Inside their cell, Rimuru noticed that Gobta was still fast asleep after 48 hours. Kaijin, feeling guilty, apologized for dragging the other dwarves into his mess. A few hours later, while the dwarves were still asleep, Gobta finally woke up, confused about where he was. Rimuru, annoyed, told Gobta to go back to sleep, joking that he deserved a place in the afterlife for being such a heavy sleeper. Panicking, Gobta tried to free himself, but Rimuru quickly silenced him. The next day, they were brought to the palace for their trial. Rimuru realized that the king himself was presiding over the case. With Vesta looking even worse from his injuries, He demanded that the king execute Kaijin immediately. The court clerk soon announced the sentencing. Kaijin was to serve 20 years of forced labor in the mines, while Rimuru and the others were given 10 years. Before they were led away, the king asked Kaijin if he would consider rejoining his army. Kaijin, however, told the king that he had already pledged himself to a new master and had no intention of going back on that. Taking Kaijin's words as a challenge, the knights prepared to strike, but the king ordered them to stand down. Instead of imprisonment, the king commanded that Kaijin and his group be exiled from the city. After they left, the king turned to Vesta and stripped him of his position. The clerk showed the king one of the healing potions that Rimuru had provided. Realizing how valuable Rimuru's connection could have been, the king scolded Vesta for ruining their relationship with the slime, as they could have had an endless supply of healing potions. Horrified by what he had done, Vesta begged for forgiveness, but the king coldly told him to f*** off. The next day, Kaijin and his companions bid farewell to the soldiers and set off on their new journey. After a few weeks of travel, Rimuru transformed into the Tempest Starwolf and unleashed a powerful black lightning strike at a nearby rock, shattering it and causing water to rise, revealing a rainbow in the sky. Awed by the immense power of the lightning, Rimuru decided it would be better to keep that skill hidden. Back at the village, Kaijin had started teaching the goblins how to forge weapons, while Garm was instructing them in armor making. Meanwhile, dwarves were teaching crafting techniques, and the goblins were learning how to construct proper houses. Rimuru noticed that when they first arrived at the village, over 500 new goblins had migrated there, seeking refuge from the increasingly dangerous forest. Rimuru wondered what would happen if he turned them away, and the system coldly informed him that they would be killed by the lurking monsters. Not wanting to send them to their doom, Rimuru decided to accept them into the village and named every single one of them, which exhausted his magic and caused him to fall asleep for several days. Upon waking, Rimuru walked through the now bustling village and discovered that Gobda had not only escaped from his cell but had learned a new skill, the ability to summon his Tempest Wolf at will. Just then, Rigard approached Rimuru, having been promoted to Goblin King. He reported that suspicious humans had been spotted in the forest, and he suspected they had come from a distant country, likely aiming to expand their territory. Meanwhile, in the forest, a group of human adventurers found themselves fleeing from a swarm of monster ants after accidentally disturbing their nest. Fed up with running, a mysterious girl in the group drew her sword, which immediately became engulfed in flames. She unleashed a powerful fire spell, pushing the ants back. As one ant lunged at her, she leaped high into the air and slayed it before swiftly cutting down another. With each strike, she ignited the ants, causing them to explode in flames. The other adventurers stood in awe, amazed by her combat skills. However, the relentless fight soon took its toll, and she grew weak from exhaustion. As a monster ant tried to sneak up on her, black lightning suddenly struck, instantly vanquishing the ant and sending her mask flying off. Rimuru appeared through the dust and returned the girl's mask, much to the surprise of the adventurers, who were shocked to see a talking slime. When Rimuru handed back her mask, he realized that she was the same girl he had seen in the fortune-telling orb, the one destined to be his soulmate. But Rimuru couldn't help but think that this meeting had come too soon. Later that day, after returning to the village, Rimuru found the adventurers devouring their food like starving gluttons. As he observed them, he felt a strange sense of familiarity, and the system reminded him that he had seen them before inside the cave. When Rigard introduced Rimuru to the adventurers as their great master, they couldn't believe that an ugly slime was the ruler of the village. To make them more comfortable, Rimuru introduced himself as a friendly slime, but the mysterious girl pointed out that he sounded like he was quoting lines from a video game. The adventurers thanked Rimuru for saving them and began introducing themselves. Cavil, their leader, introduced his group, while Iren and Gaido expressed their gratitude for the food. When the mysterious girl introduced herself as Shizu, Rimuru realized that she truly was from Japan. Cavil explained that the guild master had sent their party to scout the forest for monsters, and Rimuru started to understand how important the dragon's presence in the cave really was. That evening, Rimuru, curious, asked Shizu if she was really from Japan. Shizu, however, teased him, wondering why he introduced himself using famous lines from a video game. As she carried Rimuru, he thought it was his lucky day and told her that he, too, was from Japan. Excited by this revelation, Shizu removed her mask and asked how Rimuru ended up in this world. He explained that he had reincarnated after being killed in his previous life. Shizu then revealed that she had been summoned to this world, and Rimuru recalled what Veldora had told him about summoned humans, how they couldn't disobey their summoners and were often used as weapons. He began to suspect Shizu might be in a similar situation. Rimuru asked how she arrived in this world, and Shizu shared that she disappeared in a great flame during a devastating war in her world. Seeing her sadness, Rimuru wanted to cheer her up, so he used the system to show her memories of his past life. Shizu then saw that Rimuru had been a bit of a perv in his old life, obsessed with young, attractive elves. Embarrassed, Rimuru quickly skipped over those memories and told her how, after the war, Japan had been rebuilt into a great country. He added that he hoped to turn the Goblin village into something just as prosperous. Suddenly, Shizu dropped Rimuru, groaning in pain. Concerned, Rimuru asked what was wrong, but she claimed she had eaten some bad fruit. Rimuru, suspicious, thought she was hiding something. The next day, Shizu woke from a bad dream while Iren was still sound asleep. Shizu briefly emitted a small flame but quickly cooled down. Later that morning, as she stood gazing down a cliff, Rimuru approached her and asked if she liked the Goblin village. She admitted she did but said she needed to leave soon to avoid putting everyone in danger. When Rimuru asked if she had a destination, she revealed that she was on a journey to find her summoner. As Iren and the adventurers prepared to leave, she tried persuading Shizu to join them on their journey, but Shizu declined, afraid her presence would bring them nothing but trouble. Just as they rejoined the others, Shizu began groaning again. The adventurers thought it might just be an upset stomach, but suddenly her mask cracked and a mighty flame shot toward the sky, creating a swirl of dark clouds above them. In an instant, a massive flaming explosion knocked everyone back. As they watched in shock, they realized that Shizu was actually the famed conqueror of flames. Understanding the danger, Rimuru knew this would be a tough battle. He quickly ordered Rigard and Gopta to evacuate the goblins from the village. Meanwhile, the flames around Shizu intensified, and she transformed into the fire spirit Ifrit. With a deafening roar, a gust of powerful wind shattered the adventurers' shields, blowing them away. Ifrit then summoned fire dragons, which began burning what was left of the village. Fearing the worst, Rimuru told the adventurers to run away. However, they insisted on staying and fighting, believing this was their chance to be heroes. Cavil said they considered Shizu a friend, and Iren added that they couldn't just abandon her. Rimuru, frustrated, wondered if they had lost all sense of reason, seeing as they stood no chance against the fire spirit. When Rimuru demanded to know what Ifrit wanted, Ifrit responded by hurling flames at him. Rimuru countered with his water blade, but the flames evaporated it instantly. As the fire dragons closed in, Iren fired an icicle lance at one of the dragons, narrowly missing. Undeterred, she continued launching more, vowing to fight to the end. As the dragons spat flames at him, Rimuru summoned Ranga and began dodging the fiery onslaught. He briefly considered using all the water in his belly to put out the flames, but the system warned him that the resulting steam explosion would destroy everything around them. Just then, Iren managed to impale one of the dragons with her icicle, giving Rimuru an idea. He quickly instructed Iren to fire an icicle at him. As he swallowed it, the system analyzed it, and Ranga leaped over the dragons, spraying ice around them. Suddenly, hundreds of icicle lances appeared, striking the dragons and making them explode instantly. However, one dragon evaded the attack and, as it closed in, exploded, destroying the adventurers' remaining shield and leaving them unconscious. With the adventurers out of commission, Rimuru ordered Ranga to carry them to safety in the forest. Now determined to face Ifrit alone, Rimuru confronted the fire spirit. Ifrit summoned dozens of fiery body doubles to surround him, attempting to cook Rimuru like food in boiling oil. However, Rimuru unleashed his icicle shotgun, swiftly eliminating the duplicates until only the real Ifrit remained. However, Rimuru soon realized he had fallen into a trap as Ifrit encircled him in a massive flare, flames rising all around him. From a distance, the goblins, watching in fear, assumed Rimuru had been reduced to ashes. But to their surprise, Rimuru remained completely unharmed. The system informed him that his thermal fluctuation resistance was nullifying the fire's effects. Realizing this, Rimuru knew he had the upper hand in the fight. As Ifrit attempted to retreat, Rimuru bound him with steel thread and leaped out of the flames. Desperate, Ifrit spewed even more fire at Rimuru, but it had no effect. With his predator skill, Rimuru engulfed Ifrit, absorbing the fire spirit completely. When the battle was over, Rimuru found Shizu unconscious on the ground. That evening, as she lay resting inside a tent, Shizu, clearly nearing her final moments, apologized for nearly destroying everything. As she grew weaker, she decided to tell Rimuru her story before drawing her last breath. Shizu, with her final breaths, began telling Rimuru her story. She explained that when she was first summoned to this world, she had served as the Demon Lord's assistant for several years. One day, during a battle with a powerful hero, the Demon Lord abandoned her in his castle, thinking she could handle the hero. Shizu tried to attack the hero, but the hero was too powerful, easily fending her off until Shizu's sword lost its flame. However, instead of killing her, the hero spared Shizu's life, realizing she was just a child being controlled by the Demon Lord. The hero decided to take her in, showing her compassion. The hero gave Shizu the magic-resistant mask, which also helped suppress the powers of the fire spirit Ifrit, who had been possessing her. Shizu told Rimuru that traveling with the hero was the happiest time of her life. She learned to use magic and even managed to control Ifrit's power through the mask. But one day, the hero mysteriously disappeared, leaving Shizu behind. Heartbroken, Shizu dedicated herself to becoming stronger and made it her mission to hunt down and destroy monsters wherever they appeared. Eventually, she grew weary of fighting and retired, becoming a teacher in hopes of living a peaceful life. As time passed, her students grew up and went their separate ways, leaving her alone once again. When Rimuru asked what her true desire was, Shizu admitted that she was tired of this world and longed to find peace. She asked Rimuru to consume her with his slime so that her spirit could finally be at rest. Moved by her words, Rimuru agreed, promising to one day find and defeat the demon lord in her honor. As Shizu drew her last breath, Rimuru activated his predator skill and gently swallowed her, taking her into his body. Outside the tent, the adventurers mistakenly believed that Rimuru's healing potions had helped Shizu recover. Rigard brought her a new set of clothes, but when they entered the tent, they found a young child in her place. The wolf, Ranga, immediately recognized Rimuru's presence inside the child's body. The adventurers were confused, thinking the child might be Shizu, but Ranga explained that he could sense Rimuru's mana within the new form. To reveal the truth, Rimuru transformed back into his slime form and explained that he had consumed Shizu at her request, allowing her to finally rest in peace. He apologized for not telling them sooner, understanding how hard it would be for them to process. The next day, the adventurers told Rimuru they were heading back to their city to report to the guild master. Before leaving, they asked Rimuru to transform into his human form one more time. After he did, they thanked him in Shizu's place and promised to move forward without being losers anymore. As a parting gift, Rimuru crafted new armor and robes for them, which they gratefully accepted before leaving the village. In the following days, Kaijin and the goblins worked hard to rebuild the village, and Rimuru could already imagine them having their own little city in a few months. Later that day, Rimuru informed Rigard that he would join them for dinner, hoping his human form would let him enjoy food like everyone else. Thrilled by the news, Rigard promised to hold a grand feast in Rimuru's honor. Later that afternoon, Rimuru encountered Rigard and the other goblins as they prepared to hunt for the feast. Gobta, as usual, made a ridiculous comment, wondering if Rimuru would grow a lovely pair of missiles from all the food he'd eat. Annoyed, Rimuru quickly kicked some sense into Gobta's head. That evening, Rimuru decided to visit his old cave, wanting to test out the degenerate skill he had acquired from Shizu. He unleashed a black flame and quickly caused it to vanish, realizing it could have burned down the cave. Feeling curious, he put on Shizu's special mask, and the system informed him that it now concealed his aura, making him appear as an ordinary human. Delighted, Rimuru realized this meant he could visit new cities without drawing unwanted attention. Just then, Ranga called for Rimuru's help through thought communication, so he rushed into the forest. When he arrived, he found Gobta injured by an enemy's attack. Although Gobta had managed to survive, he begged for a healing potion. Rimuru, in his usual teasing manner, told Gobta he's a d***head to deserve one. Before Rimuru's eyes, Ranga clashed with two enemies, blasting at the trees, but the enemies remained unharmed. They started charging at him, but a wall of flames suddenly appeared, summoned by a new adversary. Sensing the situation was getting dangerous, Rimuru commanded Ranga to retreat. Meanwhile, Rigard was engaged in a fight with another monster, narrowly dodging her weapon. Thinking he could defuse the situation, Rimuru tried apologizing and suggested they talk things out. However, the lead ogre called him an evil demon, recognizing his mask as belonging to a notorious enemy. The ogre, with anger in his eyes, declared that he had come to avenge his slain brothers. He then charged at Rimuru, attempting to slay him, but Rimuru vanished before he could land a hit. A giant ogre tried to hammer Rimuru into the ground, but Rimuru quickly cast Paralysis Breath, putting the ogre to sleep, and barely dodged another ogre's attack. As he evaded, Rimuru restrained one of the ogres with steel thread and broke another's sword with his body armor, sending the ogre crashing into a tree. With only two ogres left, Rimuru wondered if they were willing to listen to reason, but the lead ogre dismissed his words, insisting they would never surrender to an orc. As Rimuru tried explaining that they had the wrong person, the elder ogre slashed off his arm in the chaos, wondering how he missed Rimuru's slime head. Just as the lead ogre prepared to finish Rimuru, Rimuru regenerated his arm in an instant with his ultra speed regeneration. The lead ogre then cast an ogre flame, trying to burn Rimuru to ashes. However, Rimuru calmly walked out of the fire unharmed. Deciding it was time to reveal his power, Rimuru removed his mask, emitting a powerful aura. He cast black flame toward the sky, forming a massive tornado of fire. To further show his strength, he obliterated a nearby rock with a dark flame, hoping to scare them into submission. Just before the lead ogre charged toward his doom, a younger ogre stepped in, suggesting that Rimuru might not be their enemy after all. The lead ogre hesitated, and Rimuru caused the flames to vanish. Curious, the lead ogre asked who Rimuru was, so Rimuru introduced himself, transforming into his slime form and offering the ogre his mask to inspect. Upon examining it, the ogres realized the mask had anti-magic properties and that Rimuru wasn't the enemy they thought. Apologizing for the misunderstanding, Rimuru invited the ogres to join them for dinner, and peace was made. That night, as they ate together, Rimuru realized he could taste food again, much to his delight. The goblins were pleased by this discovery as well. However, during dinner, Kaijin learned that the ogres had been attacked by orcs, which puzzled him. In the monster hierarchy, ogres were far stronger than orcs, so it made no sense for weaker monsters to attack stronger ones. The lead ogre explained that the orcs had attacked with overwhelming numbers while they were asleep. Rigard suspected that the orcs were being backed by an unknown enemy. The lead ogre then mentioned that he had seen a masked demon lord during the attack. When Rimuru asked how the ogres planned to rebuild their village and deal with the orc threat, the lead ogre realized he had no clear plan. Sensing their need for support, Rimuru suggested they stay with him in the meantime, offering them food and shelter. Having nowhere else to go, the lead ogre considered Rimuru's offer, unsure but intrigued by the possibility of staying. That night, the lead ogre punched a tree in frustration, feeling weak and powerless for not being able to save his village. But the following day, he accepted Rimuru's offer to stay in the village and pledged his loyalty to him. Pleased with this decision, Rimuru decided to name each of the ogres. However, after naming them all, he quickly passed out from exhaustion. When Rimuru woke up, several days had passed and his memories were a bit fuzzy. The lead ogre knelt before him and introduced himself with his new name, Benimaru. Rimuru realized he had gone into sleep mode right after naming the ogres, but was confused as to why he felt smaller, even though his magic levels had increased. He assumed it was due to evolving. Another ogre, Shuna, introduced herself and Rimuru recognized her as the princess of the ogre village. Before long, Rimuru discovered that the purple-haired ogre caressing him was Shin, and the elder ogre was named Hakuro. When he asked about the last of them, a less ugly than remembered ogre walked in and introduced himself as Kurob. Rimuru couldn't help but notice how different the ogres were compared to the goblins in his village. A few days later, Rimuru asked Benimaru why his village had been attacked. Benimaru explained that it happened after he had turned down an offer from a mysterious man who wanted to give him a name. When Rimuru learned the name of this masked figure, he realized it was the same demon lord soldier who had named Rigard's son months ago. Just then, Saoi appeared and reported to Rimuru that a group of lizardmen was traveling toward their village. He thought it was urgent, as the lizardmen had been visiting nearby goblin villages. Rimuru knew it was only a matter of time before they arrived. A few days later, Rimuru discovered that Shuna had a talent for making silk. However, Shuna had grown tired of it and jokingly tried to take Rimuru's slime form for herself. But Shin, now Rimuru's secretary, wasn't willing to give up her position. As the two ogres began emitting a powerful aura, looking to stake their claim on Rimuru, Shin seized the moment and snatched him away before Shuna could act. That afternoon, Rimuru informed the ogres that Shin had made him lunch, but they all quickly passed on the offer, fully aware of the nightmare that awaited. Saoi summoned his body doubles, telling Rimuru that he was going to scout the area, and then vanished. Soon after, Shin arrived with the lunch, and Rimuru realized it was the worst meal he had ever seen. Shin urged him to eat before it got cold, but Rimuru could already feel his soul drifting toward nirvana from just a single taste. Too terrified to eat it, the system advised Rimuru to angle the spoon to his right. Following the suggestion, he discreetly passed the food to Gobta, who immediately swallowed the disgusting, gooey concoction. Horrified, Gobta screamed in agony before passing out, as if his soul had left his body. Rimuru, thinking Gobta had made a noble sacrifice, hoped he would find peace in the afterlife. A few days later, Rigard informed Rimuru that a group of lizardmen had arrived and were waiting to meet him. Benimaru and some of the other ogres offered to accompany him. When they met the lizardmen outside the village, Rimuru wondered where the leader was. Just then, a pompous and ugly lizardman leaped forward, introducing himself as Gabaru. He demanded they kiss his feet, proclaiming himself their new savior. Rimuru and the others quickly realized Gabaru was nothing more than a foolish clown. As Gabaru's arrogance grew, Shin became increasingly angry, and in her frustration, she squeezed Rimuru like a stress ball. Gabaru continued boasting, warning that the orc army was marching toward their village and that their only hope for survival was to join his army. He even insulted them, calling them weaklings. Shun, enraged, squeezed Rimuru even tighter. When Rimuru tried to explain that they didn't actually tame the wolves, Gabaru rudely told him to shut his mouth. At that moment, Rimuru decided to summon Ranga. When Ranga appeared, the ogres noticed he had doubled in size. Gabaru, clearly intimidated, demanded that Ranga join his army and abandon Rimuru. Unmoved, Ranga just stared at him. Frustrated by Ranga's lack of response, Gabaru foolishly challenged Rimuru to a duel, hoping to impress the wolf with a victory. Before the duel could begin, Gobta suddenly reappeared, much to Rimuru's surprise. Wondering how Gobta had survived the disastrous food, the system revealed that Gobta had acquired the poison resistance skill from the experience. Ranga dropped Gobta in front of Gabaru, and Rimuru, amused by the situation, told Gobta to kick his ass. As the duel began, Gobta flung his spear at Gabaru, who narrowly dodged it. Gabaru slashed back with his own spear, but before he knew it, Gobta had vanished using his newfound shadow movement skill and knocked Gabaru down with a swift kick. Impressed by Gobta's victory, Rimuru declared him the winner, and everyone started to think Gobta might be the next big warrior. Annoyed by the lizardmen's behavior, Rimuru told them to take their loser lord out of his sight, and they quickly scurried off like frightened chickens. The following day, during a meeting, Sawe informed everyone that 200,000 orc soldiers were marching toward the village. Rimuru began to wonder how they could possibly defeat such a massive army. He suspected that a demon lord might be supporting the war, but Benimaru suggested it was more likely that an orc lord was leading the forces. Just then, Sawe mentioned that one of his body doubles had encountered a tree spirit who wished to meet Rimuru. Excited at the prospect of meeting a tree spirit, something he had always dreamed of, Rimuru immediately agreed. Before their eyes, a glowing light appeared, and a magical plant sprouted from the table, revealing the young tree spirit. She introduced herself as Trainee and apologized for her unannounced visit. When Rimuru asked why she had come, Trainee explained that she wished for him to defeat the Orc Lord, believing he was the only one capable of saving her forest. However, Benimaru grew suspicious, wondering why she hadn't sought help from other villages. Trainee explained that with the ogre village already destroyed, her best hope lay with the Slime King, believing only Rimuru could defeat the Orc Lord and prevent the forest from being obliterated. With everyone looking to him for an answer, Rimuru told Trainee that he would consider the decision carefully. As they continued their meeting, Rimuru questioned why the orcs were attacking every village in the forest. Sawe explained that the orcs were trying to grow stronger by devouring the bodies of their victims. Trainee added that the Orc Lord possessed a special ability called the Starve skill, which extended to his army, allowing them to devour any victim they encountered and gain that victim's strength and abilities, making them an increasingly dangerous threat. However, no matter how much the orcs consumed, they could never be satisfied, always hungering for more power. Realizing the orcs' intentions, Rimuru thought they had a chance to take them on and suggested that the goblins and direwolves could serve as good bait. Trainee then revealed that a soldier of a demon lord had summoned the Orc Lord, but Rimuru hesitated, unsure if he could fully trust her. Sensing his doubt, Trainee asked him once more to defeat the Orc Lord for the sake of the forest. To be sure, Rimuru asked the system for guidance, and it confirmed that Trainee, as the protector of the forest, would always support good over evil. This was all Rimuru needed to hear, but before he could respond, Shin accepted the task on his behalf. Rimuru, transforming back into his slime form, agreed to eliminate their enemies. However, the question of how to handle 200,000 orcs still lingered. He thought it might be wise to form an alliance with the Lizardmen, though definitely not with the arrogant Gabaru. Sawe suggested meeting the Lizard King to secure the alliance, and Rimuru hoped for success. The following day, Rimuru arrived at the Lizard King's palace. His powerful aura immediately unsettled the guards, who wondered who he was, sensing that his power was enough to destroy them all. Rimuru introduced himself as a messenger from his master, expressing his desire to form an alliance. The Lizard King, who had never heard of Rimuru, was confused. Sawe stepped in, explaining that Rimuru was their great master, who had sworn to defeat the Orc Lord. One of the lizard men, doubting Sawe's words, attempted to challenge him. In response, Sawe swiftly trapped the challenger in steel thread, nearly ending the fight before the Lizard King intervened, asking for peace. Sawe, respecting the king's request, released the lizardmen and reiterated that they only sought an alliance. Realizing that Rimuru could be a valuable ally, the Lizard King agreed to the alliance but asked to meet Rimuru in person before the battle. Sawe thought this was a reasonable request and promised they would return within a week. He also cautioned the Lizard King to avoid charging into battle before Rimuru's reinforcements arrived. A few hours later, the Lizard King addressed his gathered army inside the cave, instructing them to avoid engaging the orcs directly and instead focus on defending their territory until Rimuru's forces could join them. After a few days, Gabaru stormed into the Lizardman Palace, demanding that they go on the offensive against the orcs. The Lizard King, however, reminded him that they were stalling for their ally, Rimuru. Convinced he had a better plan, Gabaru insulted his father, calling him a weak and disgusting loser, and took control of the army. He commanded his forces to overthrow the king, locking him in a cell, and drew power from the king's vortex spear. As more soldiers arrived in support of Gabaru, he led them into battle in the marshlands, eager to prove his superiority. As Gabaru's army began slaying the advancing orcs, they soon noticed something horrifying. The remaining orcs were devouring the bodies of their fallen comrades. Watching this, Gabaru realized with horror that he was indeed a foolish loser. Before his eyes, the orcs began emitting an even greater aura, their power increasing with each body they consumed. Meanwhile, Rimuru and his companions rushed to the Lizardman village, hoping to arrive before the orcs. Using thought communication, Sawe informed Rimuru that a high-ranking orc was attacking a Lizardman soldier and asked if he could join the fight since they were now allies. Rimuru gave him permission to assist the Lizardmen. By the time Rimuru and his team arrived at the battlefield, Sawe had already slain the orcs, but the Lizardman soldier was badly wounded. Without hesitation, Rimuru gave her a healing potion, and she was shocked at how quickly her wounds healed. The soldier introduced herself and explained that her foolish brother, Gabiru, had overthrown their father and led their army into a war they couldn't win. She begged Rimuru to rescue their father before he was killed by the Orc Lord. Before Rimuru could respond, Shin chimed in, teasing him, saying he was too soft to say no and would definitely help Gabiru. Rimuru, a bit exasperated, wondered when Shin had started calling the shots. He then commanded Sae to rescue the Lizard King from his cell and ordered the others to prepare for battle. Back on the battlefield, Gabiru and his men found themselves surrounded by the orcs, who had grown stronger after consuming fallen lizardmen. Gabiru realized the orcs had gained webbed feet and scales from devouring their enemies. As the orcs closed in, Gabiru tried to rally his troops, urging them not to run, and for a moment, they believed he was a brave leader. Just then, a massive orc appeared before them, and Gabiru, thinking it was the Orc Lord, decided to challenge him to a one-on-one fight, hoping to end the war with this battle. The orc, however, revealed that he was only a general in the Orc Lord's army. Despite this, Gabiru pressed on, determined not to back down. The orc general knocked Gabiru back with ease, and when Gabiru cast his vortex crash, the general countered it with his own wind attack, causing a massive explosion. The general then unleashed Chaos Heater, but Gabiru managed to dodge it. Gabiru's soldiers tried to assist him, but he ordered them to stay back. He charged forward to face the general alone, fending off attacks before being knocked down again. Gabiru, in a desperate attempt, launched another attack, but the orc general easily blocked it and sent Gabiru flying like a rag doll. Just as the general prepared to deliver the finishing blow, Gobta appeared, saving Gabiru just in time. Gabiru, in shock, thought Gobta was the leader of the goblins, but Gobta, confused, asked why Gabiru's face looked so ridiculous. As Ranga appeared, he informed Gabiru that Gobta was the captain of the goblin riders, and they had come to save him on orders from Rimuru. The orc general, unimpressed, declared that they were all just food for his belly and prepared to destroy them. But before he could act, mysterious cover-like formations began appearing across the battlefield, obliterating his army in an instant. The orc general, confused and panicking, thought the lizardmen were responsible for the mysterious attacks, wondering how to eliminate them all at once. But as more orcs were destroyed, the Nimaru and the others appeared on the battlefield. The Nimaru, filled with rage, announced that he had come to avenge his fallen brothers. A mystical light appeared in his hand, and he warned the orcs that he would wipe them out without a trace. He hurled the light at the orc army, which grew into one of the destructive covers, blowing up large numbers of orcs instantly. Despite the overwhelming power of the attack, the orc general stubbornly believed they could still win and refused to abandon the battle. At that moment, Ranga stepped forward as the new challenger, emitting a powerful aura. As dark clouds gathered above, a mighty tornado descended, followed by hundreds more, sweeping away entire sections of the orc army. Rimuru, shocked by the display, asked the system what kind of skill it was, and the system informed him that it was Deathstorm, powerful enough to destroy an entire army. Moments later, black lightning struck the orc general, destroying him instantly. With a mighty roar, Ranga calmed the storm, and in that instant, he evolved into a Tempest Starwolf. Meanwhile, the Nimaru unleashed more of his devastating covers, and Hekuro darted across the battlefield, swiftly slaying orcs with precise strikes. The remaining orcs, thinking they still had a chance, foolishly attempted to attack Shin. In response, she cast a slash so powerful it obliterated everything in its path for miles. Rimuru, witnessing this, made a mental note never to upset her. As Benimaru's covers continued wiping out the orcs, Rimuru hoped that the ogres would stay with him after the war. But just then, he noticed the Orc Lord and decided to put on his mask, realizing that the final battle was near. Before Rimuru could make his move, a loud noise rang out, and a light shot across the sky, crashing into the ground. When the dust cleared, an ugly, worthless creature stood before them, cursing them for ruining his grand plan. Rimuru recognized the creature as Gelmud, an officer in the Demon Lord's army, who had given both Gabiru and the Orc Lord their names. Gelmud, filled with arrogance, revealed that he intended to create a new Demon Lord of the Forest who would be his puppet, obeying his every command. He explained that the war was orchestrated to ensure the last surviving monster would evolve into the Demon Lord. Gabiru, clueless as ever, asked if Gelmud had come to make him the Demon Lord. Gelmud scoffed at the idea, calling Gabiru worthless and commanding him to prepare himself to be eaten by the Orc Lord to empower him instead. When the Orc Lord questioned how devouring Gabiru would make him the Demon Lord, Gelmud dismissed the inquiry, insisting it was irrelevant and ordering him to do it. However, the Orc Lord, skeptical of Gelmud's intentions, refused to trust him. Enraged, Gelmud decided to kill Gabiru himself, firing a powerful energy blast at him. Gabiru's soldiers bravely threw themselves in front of the attack, taking the damage to protect their leader. Gelmud, far from done, prepared a larger attack to finish Gabiru off, claiming that the best way to make Gabiru's life worth something was to feed him to the Orc Lord. As Gelmud unleashed a barrage of smaller energy blasts aimed at Gabiru, Rimuru stepped in, absorbing all of the attacks with ease. He called the attack weak and tossed healing potions to Gabiru, telling him to heal his injured men. Rimuru, despite Gabiru's earlier foolishness, admired his bravery for continuing the fight even when victory seemed impossible. Deciding it was time to end things, Rimuru punched Gelmud, silencing his vile words, and followed it up with another blow, knocking him back. With Gelmud unwilling to fight back, Rimuru wondered if the demon had some hidden ability, but seeing none, he kicked him into the dirt. Demanding to know who the true demon lord was, Rimuru was shocked as Gelmud begged the Orc Lord for support, reminding him that he had given him his name. At that moment, the Orc Lord remembered Gelmud's words that he was destined to rule the Jira Forest as the Orc Disaster. Seizing the moment, the Orc Lord sliced Gelmud with his massive cleaver and began devouring his body. As the Orc Lord consumed Gelmud, his aura grew immensely powerful, and the system informed Rimuru that the Orc Lord's magicules were skyrocketing. He was now on the verge of evolving into a demon lord. At that moment, a dark wind swirled around the Orc Lord, signaling the completion of his evolution into the Orc Disaster. The system announced the transformation, and Rimuru realized the immense danger this pig-rhino combination posed to the world. The Orc Disaster threatened to annihilate every living creature in the forest until only he remained. Knowing he couldn't allow this monster to live, Rimuru prepared for a fierce battle. The ogres, confident in their abilities, asked Rimuru to let them take charge of the fight. Shin was the first to strike, leaping high to attack, but the Orc Disaster blocked her and knocked her back. Undeterred, she charged again, but the Orc Disaster thought he was about to finish her off when Hakuro suddenly appeared, slashing at the monster. Yet, the Orc Disaster quickly reattached his head, thanks to an upgraded healing skill. Saoi trapped the monster with steel threads, and Benimaru followed up by firing a mystical light that expanded into a magical cover, erupting into a hell flare to prevent the monster from healing. Ranga summoned Black Thunder to strike the Orc Disaster, but Rimuru sensed the attack wasn't strong enough and advised Ranga to conserve his magicules for recovery. As the smoke cleared, they realized the Orc Disaster seemed nearly invincible, with his resilience making it feel like he had 9 lives. Just then, an orc appeared before the Orc Disaster and offered himself as a sacrifice. Without hesitation, the Orc Disaster devoured the orc, gaining even more power. Still hungry for more, the Orc Disaster launched an energy attack that dispersed into dozens of blasts, but Rimuru quickly absorbed them all. Rimuru then told the ogres that he would take control of the battle. Approaching the monster, Rimuru instructed the system to prepare him for battle mode, unlocking a new power. The Orc Disaster, now fully aware of Rimuru's strength, commanded his Chaos Eater skill to consume Rimuru. But Rimuru dodged the attacks with ease, slashing off the monster's arm and destroying his cleaver in the process. Just as Rimuru thought he had gained the upper hand, the Orc Disaster ripped out another weapon to continue the fight. A massive energy burst surrounded the orc, and his arm regenerated instantly. The Orc Disaster, now fully fixated on Rimuru, declared that he wanted to devour him, launching a barrage of powerful lights. Rimuru absorbed every attack and used the opportunity to get closer. At the height of the battle, the Orc Disaster managed to grab Rimuru, threatening to devour him. However, Rimuru quickly activated a flare circle, surrounding the monster with flames hot enough to roast even the devil himself. Yet, to Rimuru's shock, the Orc Disaster remained unscathed, revealing that he had a fire resistance skill. Rimuru told the system to stand down, deciding to handle the monster on his own. Rimuru transformed into his slime form and declared that he would consume the Orc Disaster until there was nothing left. He melted onto the orc, spreading across his body like glue. The Orc Disaster frantically tried to fend off the slime, but Rimuru continued to envelop him, stretching across the monster's entire body until he overwhelmed him completely. The Orc Disaster struggled in vain as Rimuru slowly consumed every last piece of him. As Rimuru delved into the memories of the Orc Lord, Geld, he saw that a few months prior, Geld had left his village to search for food for his starving people. Weakened by hunger, Geld had collapsed in the forest. It was then that Gelmud found him, offering him a name and some food in exchange for his agreement to become a demon lord. Reflecting on this, Geld told Rimuru that he couldn't afford to be defeated, as it would doom his entire clan to starvation. Rimuru, however, told him it was too late, he was already defeated and would soon dissolve inside Rimuru's belly. Feeling sorry for his people, Geld wondered how his clan would survive without him. Rimuru, despite the grim situation, offered to devour the sins of Geld and his fellow orcs, allowing them to find peace in nirvana. At that moment, Geld transformed back into his original self and found himself in a paradise free from hunger. He thanked Rimuru for saving him and disappeared as the system announced that Geld had entered the Great Beyond. With Geld's defeat, the Hill of Water dispelled, revealing Rimuru. The orcs, regaining control over their minds, decided to end the war. Everyone celebrated their victory, relieved that the battle was over. The next day, Rimuru asked the ogres if they planned to return to their village now that the war had ended. However, Benimaru expressed his desire to continue serving Rimuru, offering his allegiance, saying they wanted to stay as his loyal followers. Shin, pleased, happily declared she had the best job in the world and was more than willing to make her cannons his pillow. The following day, all the monsters gathered for a meeting to discuss the fate of the orcs. Many wondered what punishment the orcs should face for the destruction they had caused. Rimuru, however, shocked them by stating he had no intention of punishing the pig-faced orcs. He explained that under similar circumstances, any race might have done the same thing out of desperation. The Lizard King disagreed, saying that the orcs at least deserved some form of punishment, but Benimaru pointed out that hunger is a powerful motivator. With no punishment in store, the Lizard King questioned what would become of the orcs. With over 50,000 remaining, Rimuru saw an opportunity and suggested they could help rebuild the Goblin village. One of the orcs, surprised by Rimuru's generosity, asked why he would accept them. Rimuru explained that keeping them busy would prevent them from falling into the hands of a worse devil than Jelmut. This was the best news the orcs had ever heard, and they gratefully thanked Rimuru for giving them a chance at redemption. Trainee, satisfied with the decision, announced that she would share the bounty of the forest with the orcs, ensuring they would have enough food. As the caretaker of the forest, Trainee also declared that Rimuru would be the new chancellor of the Jura forest. With every clan in agreement, Rimuru accepted the chancellor position, ready to lead the forest's diverse inhabitants into a new era of peace and cooperation. After the meeting, as the ogres were leaving, one of the orc monsters asked for their forgiveness. Benimaru, uninterested in the idea of executing him, thought it would be a waste of his talents. The next day, Rimuru decided to make that orc the new leader of the clan and named him Glen in honor of their former leader. A mystical light surrounded Glen as he evolved into the Orc King. Later that day, Rimuru named all the orc survivors, eventually falling into sleep mode from exhaustion. Within a few months, the orcs had learned to build houses and were becoming experts thanks to their massive strength. They built structures twice as fast, even laying down an aqueduct and installing flushing toilets and sewage systems, drawing on Rimuru's knowledge from his past life as a contractor. As the city grew closer to his vision, Rimuru was proud of their progress. One day, Sawe appeared, warning Rimuru that a group of knights was approaching. Rimuru quickly realized that the knights were led by the hero king of the dwarves. Fearing potential trouble, Rimuru instructed Benimaru to prepare for evacuation if war broke out. As the hero king arrived, Kaijin rushed to greet him, only for the king to comment that Kaijin's face looked worse than waste. Rimuru introduced himself as the chancellor of the Jura forest, transforming into his human form in hopes of gaining respect. The king, however, challenged Rimuru, wanting to test his strength. The king proposed a challenge. If Rimuru could block all of his attacks, he would be declared the winner. Just as the challenge began, Trainee, the tree spirit, appeared to serve as a witness. As the battle commenced, the king used his powerful thunder of heaven and earth technique. Rimuru narrowly avoided being struck but quickly blocked the king's next attack, leaving everyone in shock. Impressed by Rimuru's skill, the king apologized for attacking him and asked how Rimuru had learned to counter his technique. Rimuru revealed that he had learned it from his sword master, Hakuro, who then stepped forward. The king recognized Hakuro as his former teacher, and they happily reconnected. That night, during dinner, the king proposed a treaty with Rimuru, acknowledging the rapid growth of the forest into a thriving city. He believed it wouldn't be long before Rimuru's city surpassed others and became the most powerful in the world. Rimuru agreed to the treaty and decided to name their new city Tempest Federation, drawing inspiration from his name and the forest. Rigard, delighted by the decision, suggested naming their village the capital city Rimuru. Rimuru initially objected to naming the village the capital city Roru, but Benimaru and Shin insisted it was the perfect name, leaving Rimuru no choice but to accept. A few days later, the hero king of the dwarves returned with an unexpected gift, Vesta, who was tossed onto the ground in front of everyone. The king explained that Vesta had been kicked out of the palace for being useless and hoped Rimuru could help him find purpose. Vesta, ashamed, begged for forgiveness and promised to become a better person, even offering to work as their slave. Kaijin vouched for Vesta's talents, asking Rimuru to accept him into the city. Rimuru agreed, and Vesta promised to quit being a troublemaker. Just as the king flew off, Rimuru noticed Gabiru had also appeared in the city. Shin, frustrated, threatened to cut off his head, but Gabiru claimed he had good intentions and wanted to prove his loyalty. His sister, asking for Rimuru's mercy, explained that Gabiru was broke and homeless. Unable to refuse, Rimuru accepted Gabiru into the city, much to Shin's dismay. Later that day, Rimuru named Gabiru's sister and her entourage, giving them names that disgusted Gabiru. However, as Gabiru grew jealous, a golden light shone around him, unlocking a hidden power and overriding his name. After Rimuru named his sister and her companions, they evolved into dragonoid forms. Rimuru tasked Sawe with training them into great warriors, though Sawe wasn't sure if it was possible. Meanwhile, Vesta was given a lab inside the cave, where he had the freedom to carry out his experiments. In a distant city, 4 demon lords watched Rimuru in an orb, observing him as he consumed the orc lord. One demon lord, Milim, thought Rimuru would be a worthy challenger and was eager to meet him. Clayman reminded her they had agreed to avoid the forest, but Milim dismissed his warnings and flew out the window. Sensing a huge surge of magical power approaching the city, Rimuru hurried out to intercept it. A light crashed into the forest, unleashing a massive cloud of dust. When the dust cleared, Milim introduced herself, revealing that she was a demon lord and had come to meet Rimuru, having heard he was the strongest in the city. She poked at him like a balloon, curious to see if he would burst. Milim boasted about her ability to see everyone's magic levels, even when hidden. Rimuru considered checking her stats but decided it wasn't worth it, given her flat demeanor. When asked what she wanted, Milim replied that she was just introducing herself. Before long, Shin attacked her, but Milim easily caught Shin's blade and cast her aside. Sawe bound Milim in steel threads, and Benimaru trapped her in a magical cover, but Milim destroyed it with ease, unleashing a mighty wind that left a massive hole in the ground. Realizing how powerful she was, Rimuru decided to step in. Milim, finding Rimuru weak, challenged him to defeat her in a single attack. Rimuru accepted, despite the system warning him that she was 10 times stronger. He quickly devised a plan and, instead of fighting, stuffed a delicious honey-filled dumpling into Milim's mouth. She was instantly overwhelmed by the taste and begged for more. Rimuru told her to admit defeat, promising more food in exchange. Milim, desperate for another taste, agreed to a tie and promised never to attack anyone from Tempest Federation. Satisfied, Rimuru gave her more honey, though he feared she might devour it all. As Milim gorged on the honey, she asked Rimuru if he had ever thought of becoming a demon lord. Rimuru, uninterested, said the title was pointless and would only add more enemies to his already complicated life. Shocked by his response, Milim demanded to know more about him and how he could possibly have more enemies than a demon lord. Annoyed by her persistence, Rimuru eventually agreed to show her the city but warned her to behave. The ogres, impressed, thought Rimuru had tamed a demon lord, and Benimaru joked about Rimuru being Alpamael for managing such a feat. Just then, Gabaru appeared, wondering who the strange girl was, only to be knocked out cold by a single punch from Milim. She explained that she was in a good mood, which was the only reason she spared his life. Gabaru, meanwhile, saw his life flash before his eyes. Trying to restore peace, Rimuru asked Milim to stop acting like a moody teenager, but she laughed, saying she was simply saying hello. Later that day, Rimuru introduced Milim to the city, and everyone was shocked to see a demon lord in their midst. The citizens marveled at Rimuru's genius for befriending a notorious tyrant like Milim. To their surprise, Milim announced that she would start living in the city as a special guest and asked Rimuru if they could be friends. Although Rimuru found the idea pointless, since she had no real story to develop, he reluctantly agreed when she pouted like a child. That evening, during a meeting, Kaijin voiced his concerns about having a demon lord like Milim in the city. He warned that the other demon lords might grow jealous and retaliate. Benimaru agreed, stating that Milim's power could provoke a war with the other lords. Rigard added that, in the event of a war, Rimuru would be blamed for bringing Milim into their city. However, Hakiro believed they might be safer with her around, as her presence could deter potential threats. Meanwhile, in a distant kingdom, the ruler grew curious about who Rimuru truly was. His assistant, Fuse, suggested they visit the Goblin city to assess the situation and even hinted that they could eliminate Rimuru if he posed a threat. That same day, Fuse informed the three adventurers that they would be joining him on a visit to the Slime King. Back in the Goblin City, Rimuru checked on Vesta's progress with his experiments. Vesta excitedly revealed that he had created a communication crystal and used it to inform the Dwarf King that Milim was now a guest in the city. Vesta also presented a new healing potion he had developed, made from a sample of Rimuru's slime. When Rimuru appraised it, the system confirmed that it was equal in potency to Rimuru's own healing potion. Rimuru suggested they sell the healing potions for profit, but Kaijin advised against it, warning that it would waste valuable resources. Instead, he proposed reserving the potions for emergencies. Vesta offered a compromise, producing lower quality potions for sale while keeping the high quality ones for critical situations. Kaijin agreed, adding that even the Dwarf Kingdom could benefit from this trade. As they were leaving the cave, an explosion shook the city. Rimuru quickly flew to the site of the disturbance, where Sawe informed him that a troublemaker had arrived, only to be knocked unconscious by Milim. Upon arrival, Rimuru noticed that Rigard's face had been burned in the scuffle. Though Rigard insisted that there was nothing to worry about, Rimuru doused him with a healing potion, thinking his burned face was scary enough already. Looking at the troublemaker, Rimuru realized the guy deserved to be knocked out. Milim proudly explained that she had taught the intruder a lesson to keep him from causing more trouble. The troublemaker, who had introduced himself as Phobio, claimed to be one of Demon Lord Carrion's top warriors and boasted of his strength. He even demanded that they make him king, knocking Rigard down with a fiery blow before anyone could challenge him. However, Milim, with her burning aura, swiftly stepped in to put Phobio in his place, ready to roast him if necessary. As Phobio, the Beastketeer, attempted to unleash his flames, Milim effortlessly knocked him out with a single blow, causing the earlier explosion. Rimuru, seeing her reckless behavior, was frustrated that she hadn't chosen to de-escalate the situation peacefully. He accused her of disturbing the city's peace, despite her trying to justify that she had saved the city. Rimuru, determined to assert his authority, told Milim that she wouldn't be getting any lunch as punishment. Milim, devastated by the harsh penalty, almost destroyed the unconscious Phobio out of frustration, but Rimuru stopped her just in time. Shortly after, Milim was happily eating lunch in Rimuru's office, acting like an innocent child. Rimuru then turned to Phobio, demanding to know why he had come to the city. Phobio, still cocky, called Rimuru a low-ranking slime and refused to answer. Rimuru warned him that his response would decide whether they became enemies or allies, making it clear that the consequences could be severe. Phobio, thinking Rimuru was bluffing, questioned how such a weak slime had managed to hypnotize the city into following him. Rimuru calmly reminded Phobio that he ruled over the entire Jira forest and could easily declare war on Phobio's kingdom. Realizing that his kingdom likely wouldn't stand a chance against Rimuru, Phobio finally revealed that he had been sent by Demon Lord Carrion to scout for new soldiers to add to his army. Rimuru understood then that the other demon lords were beginning to view his growing city as a potential threat. He ordered Phobio to leave at once, deeming him too useless to even bother with execution. Rimuru also commanded that if Demon Lord Carrion wanted a meeting, he should appear himself. As Phobio left, Rimuru turned to Milim, asking her to spill everything she knew about Demon Lord Carrion, whom Phobio served. Milim hesitated, explaining that the demon lords had sworn not to interfere with each other's business. Rimuru, convinced he could make her talk, reminded her that since they were friends, her secrets were also his. Milim, torn between loyalty to her fellow demon lords and her friendship with Rimuru, remained undecided. To entice her, Rimuru promised her a gift if she shared what she knew. Excited by the offer, Milim finally agreed. Milim revealed that the demon lords had been plotting together, using Jelmud to create a fake demon lord that could be easily defeated as part of their twisted entertainment. Bored with their stagnant lives, they had sought new ways to amuse themselves. Shen, however, reassured him that they would all stand by him in battle if the demon lords ever came after him. Meanwhile, in the forest, a group of travelers made their way toward the Goblin city, planning to meet Rimuru and possibly start a war. Along the way, they sensed a powerful monster nearby. Using his farsight skill, the group's leader, Yam, spotted a group of adventurers about to be devoured by a giant spider. The adventurers, panicking, ran in their direction as the massive spider emerged from the trees. Yam commanded his men to stand in formation, ordering one of them to cast a strengthening spell on him as he prepared to slay the beast. However, before he could act, Gobta and his team of rookie goblin riders appeared. Gobta, surprised to see the adventurers, took matters into his own hands. In the blink of an eye, he had slain the spider, skinned it, and his team began cooking the meat in a giant pot. Later, in Rimuru's private office, he introduced himself to the visiting city knights and asked why they had come. Yam, full of pride, thought Rimuru didn't deserve an answer and demanded to know why the entire city treated him like a god when he was just a disgusting slime. Before anyone could react, Shin smacked him for disrespecting Rimuru, but Rimuru healed him instantly. Rimuru expressed his desire to build good relations with humans and hoped they could become partners, like with the Dwarf Kingdom. Fuse, surprised by Rimuru's openness, informed them that he had now switched sides to support Rimuru. Rimuru, understanding their doubts, invited them to investigate the city as much as they liked. He then asked if the news of him slaying the Orc Lord had spread to other cities. Fuse reassured him that the Dwarf King had hidden the information from the public. Relieved, Rimuru proposed that Yam take the credit for slaying the Orc Lord. This way, others would see him as a hero, and Rimuru's growing influence would be downplayed. Yam, realizing the wisdom in this plan, agreed. That evening, as they watched the sunset, Yam admitted that he had misjudged the city, thinking it was a place of hostility. Seeing the peaceful nature of the city and its people, he swore his allegiance to Rimuru, vowing to follow only his commands from that day forward. Meanwhile, in a distant castle, Demon Lord Clayman welcomed a mysterious goddess-like figure named Tyr into his office. Curious, he asked if she had successfully spied on the nearby kingdoms. Tyr confirmed that she had, but brought up an important issue, Milim's decision to stay with Rimuru. Clayman, intrigued, agreed that something was amiss. Tyr explained that while most of the demon lords had no immediate plans to attack Rimuru's city, there was one demon lord likely plotting a war. She suspected they intended to revive the Caribes, a powerful ancient monster capable of world destruction. Clayman remembered the terrifying power of the Caribes and ordered Tyr to find the monster's sealed location before anyone else could. Tyr disappeared into the ground, leaving Clayman to ponder the destruction he could cause once the Caribes was under his control. So that's it for today's. Comment part 2 if you want the next part, guys. Till then, watch the following video and I will see you in the next one.